Dance with me before he notices. Those were the words that pulled a lonely single dad onto the floor, and nothing in his life was ever the same again. Have you ever had one small choice change everything? Share your thoughts below and subscribe for more stories that remind us love can find us when we least expect it. Michael Carter never planned to be at that wedding, not really. At 38, a high school literature teacher and single father, his Saturday nights usually ended with lesson plans stacked on the kitchen counter and his daughter Sophie's laughter echoing down the hall. It had been years since he lost his wife, and in that time, he had grown used to quiet routines, the kind that carried just enough comfort to fill the silence without ever stirring the ache that lived beneath it. When his friend called, sick with the flu, asking if Michael could take his place at a vineyard wedding just outside Seattle, his first instinct was to say no. He hadn't worn a suit in years. The idea of mingling with strangers beneath twinkling lights felt foreign, like stepping into a play where everyone else knew their lines. But guilt can be persuasive, and politeness even more so. So he found himself driving to Woodinville that evening, the soft hum of the radio filling the car, his phone buzzing every so often with texts from Sophie, silly questions, tiny updates, the kind of tether that reminded him he was never entirely alone. The vineyard spread out like something from a storybook. Lanterns hung low, glowing against the fading sky. Guests spilled across the lawn with champagne flutes in hand, their laughter bright and effortless. Michael adjusted the tie he'd borrowed, already longing for the comfort of his worn-in jeans. He lingered near the bar, ordered a club soda, and told himself he would stay just long enough to be polite. It wasn't that he disliked weddings. It was that weddings reminded him of the life he once had and the life he couldn't get back. He stood there quietly, phone in hand, typing back to Sophie as she reminded him not to forget her bedtime story later. That was Michael's world now. Bedtime stories, spelling tests, burnt toast in the mornings. It wasn't a bad world, not at all, but it was a small one, safe, predictable. As music drifted across the dance floor and couples moved with practiced ease, Michael remained on the sidelines. He'd grown comfortable there, in the role of an observer rather than a participant. Maybe that was why the evening felt like just another obligation, something to be endured, not enjoyed. Still, a part of him couldn't help but notice how alive everyone else seemed. The laughter, the motion, the closeness. It stirred something faint, something he quickly pushed aside. He checked the time again, wondering if it would be rude to leave before the cake was cut. For Michael Carter, that night was supposed to be nothing more than a quiet exercise in patience, a brief appearance, a nod to friendship, and then a return home to Sophie. He had no expectations beyond that, no anticipation of surprise, certainly no thought that stepping into a room full of strangers could alter the rhythm of his carefully mended life. But life has its own way of writing stories, and sometimes the chapters you never plan on turning are the ones that change everything. Just as Michael was preparing himself for a quiet exit, the air in the vineyard shifted. The music played on, couples still twirled beneath the lanterns, but for him, the entire room seemed to pause. She walked in, Olivia Bennett, though he didn't know her name yet. What caught him first wasn't the way the burgundy dress clung softly to her frame, elegant and understated, but the expression in her eyes. They moved across the crowd as though searching, not for connection, but for an escape. She was late. Everyone else had already settled into their rhythm of conversation and laughter. Yet here she was, stepping onto the scene alone. Her heels clicked against the patio stones with a confidence that seemed rehearsed, but Michael could see it. Something fragile flickered just beneath the surface. He told himself he wasn't the kind of man to notice details like that anymore. Life had been too practical, too anchored in bedtime routines and grocery lists. But he noticed her. He couldn't not. The vineyard lights caught the deep burgundy of her dress, making her look as though she had stepped out of another era, like a character misplaced from an old film. She reached for a glass of champagne and held it carefully, though she didn't take a sip right away. Instead, she lingered at the edge of the dance floor, her body angled ever so slightly away from the crowd, as though bracing herself. Michael shifted in his seat near the bar, pretending to study his phone, though his gaze kept drifting back to her. There was no reason to. She was a stranger, yet something about her presence felt oddly magnetic. Guests around her seemed oblivious. They laughed, they danced, they leaned close to one another with the kind of ease that comes from comfort. Olivia, though, seemed suspended in a different world, present but apart. Maybe that was what drew Michael's attention so sharply. He knew that feeling. He had lived it for years, standing in rooms full of people, yet feeling like he was pressed against the glass, looking in. For a moment, their eyes nearly met, and Michael's breath caught in his throat. She turned away quickly, pretending to admire the band, but not before he caught the brief tightening of her jaw. There was tension there, unspoken, something unresolved. He didn't understand it, but it registered all the same. Michael told himself to look away, to let the night pass without complication. But his attention refused to shift. Every movement she made, the slight rise of her shoulders as she exhaled, the way she gripped the stem of her glass just a little too tightly, felt like lines of a story he wanted to understand. The strangest part was, he hadn't wanted to understand anyone new in years. He had promised himself that. Still, Olivia Bennet had entered the vineyard like a storm wrapped in silk, quiet, elegant, but impossible to ignore. Though she stood across the lawn, surrounded by laughter and music, Michael felt as though she were the only one in the room. He didn't know it yet, but this was the beginning of a chapter he hadn't planned to read. A chapter that would change not only his night, but the shape of the life he thought was already written. Michael had almost convinced himself to turn away, to slip out quietly before the weight of the night pressed any heavier on him. But then he saw it, the shift in Olivia's posture, the way her shoulders tightened, her jaw set. A tall man in a navy suit was moving toward her, each step deliberate, his eyes fixed only on her, even from across the lawn. Michael sensed the tension, subtle but unmistakable, the kind of heaviness that settles between two people with history that has not yet healed. Olivia's grip on her champagne glass faltered. For a second, she looked like a bird startled mid-flight, unsure of which direction to take. Then, just as the man drew closer, her gaze swept the room and landed on Michael. He didn't have time to process what was happening before she was walking toward him, and her movements quick but steady, as though she'd made a decision in an instant. "Hi," she said softly, breath catching as she reached him. Then, without waiting for his reply, she added, "I know this is strange, but would you dance with me, please?" Just before he notices. Michael blinked. Of all the things he imagined might happen that night, being pulled into a stranger's orbit like this wasn't on the list. "Wait, what?" he managed, his voice low with surprise. Her hand found his, warm and insistent. "You're not with anyone, right? I just need 2 minutes." There it was, that quiet urgency, that look in her eyes that was less about romance and more about rescue. Michael's instincts as a father, as a man who had learned to read unspoken signals, rose to the surface. He nodded before his mind fully caught up with his body. A smile flickered across her face, brief but real. Then they were stepping onto the dance floor. The band played a soft Sinatra cover, the kind of song that lingered in the air like a memory. Olivia placed one hand on his shoulder, the other still holding his as though it anchored her to something safe. Michael had not danced in years, not since his wedding. The memory pressed against him as they moved, slowly, uncertain at first. But the weight of her hand, the steadiness of her breath just inches away, pulled him out of the past and into this moment. She didn't look at him at first. Her eyes stayed fixed just over his shoulder, her lips pressed together tightly. Michael cleared his throat gently. "You okay?" he asked, his voice barely above the music. There was a pause. "Yeah," she whispered, another pause. "No, not really." Michael didn't need to ask why. He followed her line of sight and saw the man in the navy suit standing at the edge of the floor, arms crossed, mouth set hard, the kind of stare meant to intimidate. "That's my ex," she murmured under her breath, her words so quiet they barely reached him. "We broke up months ago. He cheated, and now he's here, acting like nothing happened." Michael tightened his grip on her hand, not to claim, not to possess, but to steady. "Classic wedding move," he muttered. It earned him the smallest chuckle from Murr, a sound that felt like a fragile victory. For the first time since she walked in, Olivia looked at him, really looked. Her eyes softened, and the tension in her shoulders eased just a little. Two strangers moving in a slow circle beneath the lanterns, finding in each other not perfection, but refuge. In that moment, Michael realized that sometimes the most unexpected dances aren't about the steps at all. They're about the courage to let someone else hold you, even if just for a song. The music shifted into another slow melody, the kind that seemed to stretch time itself. Michael kept his steps steady, letting Olivia guide the pace. Her hand still rested lightly against his shoulder, but the tension in her grip slowly softened. For the first time that evening, she allowed her gaze to settle on him rather than the shadows behind his back. "You must think I'm ridiculous," she whispered, her voice trembling at the edges, dragging a stranger onto the dance floor just to avoid him. Michael shook his head gently. "No, I think you're braver than you realize." Her lips parted slightly, almost as if the compliment had caught her off guard. She let out a small breath, one that sounded too heavy for someone simply enjoying a wedding. "Months ago," she began, her words careful, "I thought I had everything figured out. I trusted him. I believed him. Then one morning, I woke up to find out the life I thought I had was already gone. He cheated with someone I knew, someone close." Her voice faltered, but she pushed on. "Tonight he shows up like none of it mattered, like I'm supposed to smile and pretend it didn't break me." Michael didn't answer right away. He wasn't a man who filled silence just to keep it from echoing. Instead, he let the moment breathe. His hand tightened slightly around hers, a small gesture, but one that carried the weight of presence. "You don't have to pretend with me," he said finally, his voice low, steady. Her eyes shimmered as she blinked quickly, forcing back tears that threatened to fall. "I didn't come here to cause drama," she said almost apologetically. "I didn't want anyone thinking I showed up to cry over him. I wanted to stand here and feel like myself again, even if it was only for a song." Michael offered a fond smile. "So you grabbed the least threatening guy in the room." That earned him a real smile, quick and fleeting, but it lit up her face just enough to soften the ache behind her eyes. "Exactly," she murmured. "You look safe. You look kind." The words hit him harder than he expected. Safe? Kind? He hadn't heard anyone describe him like that in years. Maybe not since before Sophie was old enough to form her own words. Yet here was a stranger in the middle of a crowded dance floor, seeing something in him he had almost forgotten was there. The song drifted on, and neither of them made a move to step away. It wasn't about romance. Not then. It was about survival, about standing together in a space where the world felt too heavy to hold alone. Olivia let her head tilt slightly, just enough to rest near his shoulder without truly leaning. Michael, for the first time in a long while, allowed himself to simply be present. No past weighing down, no future demanding answers, just this moment, just this song. In that quiet, beneath the hum of music and laughter around them, two strangers found a rare kind of understanding. Not a spark of passion. Not yet. Something smaller, gentler, but perhaps far more necessary. A reminder that even in the middle of brokenness, kindness could still be enough to carry someone through a song. The night slipped away more quickly than either of them expected. One song turned into two, then into three. The man in the navy suit eventually disappeared into the blur of guests, leaving Olivia free from the weight of his gaze. Yet she didn't let go of Michael's hand. They talked in the spaces between the music, about books, about little fragments of family, about the kind of small details people usually save for those they trust. She admitted she loved old movies, but always burned garlic bread. He told her about Sophie's fascination with dinosaurs and his own irrational dislike of cruise ships. None of it was earth-shattering, but it felt strangely important, as though each confession stitched a quiet thread between them. When the final notes of the band faded and the lanterns began to dim, Michael walked Olivia toward the parking lot. The night air was cool, carrying the faint scent of grapes and damp earth. She held her heels in one hand now, her bare feet brushing against the gravel, a picture of elegance, undone, but somehow more real because of it. He wanted to ask her name, her number, something to guarantee that this connection would not dissolve with the night, but the words caught in his throat. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was respect for the fragile balance they had created. a space built on honesty rather than expectation. At her car, she turned to him. For a moment, she simply stood there, studying his face as though trying to memorize it. Then with a soft smile, she leaned forward and pressed a kiss against his cheek. The gesture was gentle, fleeting, but it carried more weight than he could have imagined. "Thank you," she whispered, her breath warm against his skin. "Thank you for seeing me." Before Michael could reply, she opened the door and slipped inside. The headlights flared, and just like that, she was gone, swallowed by the dark road leading out of the vineyard. He stood there for a long time, the imprint of her words still humming in his chest. "Thank you for seeing me." It was such a simple phrase, yet it replayed in his mind with a persistence that unsettled him. On the drive home, he found himself smiling at nothing, then shaking his head at the absurdity of it. He hadn't even asked for her last name. No number, no promise, just a moment suspended in time. Yet, when he let himself into his quiet house, checked on Sophie, and tucked her blanket around her small shoulders, his thoughts strayed back to Olivia, the way her voice trembled when she confessed her hurt, the way her smile, brief and unguarded, seemed to chase away shadows. In the days that followed, she lingered like a song he couldn't forget. During class, when he read aloud passages from novels about chance encounters, her face would rise in his mind. At the grocery store, he caught himself scanning the aisles as though she might appear between shelves of pasta and cereal. It was foolish, he told himself, a fleeting connection, nothing more. Still, her memory clung to him, not with the fire of infatuation, but with the quiet ache of something unfinished. Michael Carter had spent years teaching his students about the power of stories, how the smallest details, the smallest moments, could change the entire arc of a narrative. Now, standing alone in his kitchen, with the echo of her words still in his heart, he wondered if maybe, just maybe, he had stepped into the beginning of one himself. Weeks passed, yet Olivia's presence lingered in Michael's thoughts like a melody that refused to fade. Life, as always, moved forward. Mornings with Sophie filled with burnt toast and Russian backpacks. Afternoons with his students lost in Shakespeare and Steinbeck. But in the quiet moments, when the classroom emptied or when Sophie drifted to sleep with her favorite dinosaur book still in her hands, Michael would hear those words again. "Thank you for seeing me." It wasn't infatuation. It was a memory, insistent and unfinished. On a gray Seattle evening, the school gym buzzed with chatter as families gathered for the annual reading night. Tables lined the walls, stacked high with children's books, while paper lanterns swung gently from the rafters. Michael adjusted a pile of novels on one of the displays, listening to Sophie chatter beside him about which story she should read first. She had insisted on wearing her bright red author glasses, plastic frames that made her look like the smallest, most determined librarian in the city. As he set down another book, he heard Sophie's voice rise above the noise. "Dad," she whispered loudly, tugging on his sleeve, "that lady's dress looks like a raspberry." Michael turned, half smiling at her description, and then his heart stopped. There she was, Olivia. For a moment he thought he'd imagined it, his mind filling in the blank space of longing. But she froze too, her eyes locking with his, wide and uncertain, as though she wasn't sure if he was real or just a vivid memory. "Olivia," he breathed, almost disbelieving. Her lips curved slowly into a smile, hesitant at first, then blooming with recognition. "Michael." Sophie looked between them, her curiosity bubbling over. "You know her." Olivia knelt gracefully so she was eye level with Sophie. "You must be Sophie," she said warmly. "I've heard you like dinosaurs." Sophie's face lit up instantly. "Do you like dinosaurs? I mean, who doesn't?" Olivia laughed softly, a sound that seemed to loosen the tightness in Michael's chest. "Exactly, who doesn't?" Just like that, the walls that had stood between them weeks ago seemed to dissolve. Sophie's excitement pulled Olivia closer, weaving her into their small world as naturally as if she had always belonged there. Michael stood back for a moment, watching the two of them exchange words and laughter, and felt something stir inside him. Relief, maybe gratitude, or perhaps simply the realization that fate had given him another chance. As the evening unfolded, Michael and Olivia found themselves talking easily again. their words flowing in the spaces Sophie's chatter left open. She told him she had just transferred to the district, taking a position in the mental health outreach program. Tonight was her first real introduction to the families. "That's quite the coincidence," Michael said with a smile that felt too full to hide. "Or maybe not," Olivia replied softly, her eyes steady on his. By the end of the night, Sophie was clutching a copy of Danny and the Dinosaur, giggling as Olivia signed her name in the front like an author. Olivia leaned closer to Michael as the crowd thinned. "I wasn't sure I'd ever see you again." Michael smiled, his voice low but sure. "I was hoping I would." With that, the thread that had been left dangling weeks ago was tied again. Not with fanfare, not with sparks, but with something quieter, something real. A second chance handed to them in the most ordinary of places, beneath the hum of fluorescent lights and the laughter of children. In the weeks that followed, Olivia's presence became less of a surprise and more of a rhythm, weaving itself into the fabric of Michael and Sophie's days. It began in small, almost unnoticeable ways. A smile exchanged in the school hallway when their paths crossed. A brief conversation during morning drop-off when Olivia would crouch down to tell Sophie she liked her colorful socks, or ask which dinosaur had captured her imagination that day. Each encounter carried a warmth that lingered long after she walked away. Michael found himself looking forward to those moments, though he tried not to admit it too quickly, even to himself. It had been so long since someone outside of Sophie had found space in his world, and longer still since he'd allowed it. Yet Olivia didn't push her way in. She simply appeared, offering pieces of herself gently, as though giving him the choice to take them or not. A cup of coffee handed over during a teacher workday, a book recommendation slipped into his mailbox with a note scrawled in neat handwriting, a quick joke shared as they hurried down the hall. Sophie, of course, had no hesitation. Children rarely do. She adored Olivia from the beginning, clinging to her stories and laughing at her playful questions. "Can we keep her?" Sophie whispered one Friday evening after Olivia had surprised them with a bag of cookies in the school parking lot, her mouth full of crumbs, her eyes sparkling with innocence. Michael couldn't help but laugh, the sound startling him. It had been too long since laughter came so easily. Olivia laughed too, and in that moment, something shifted. Their connection stretched beyond the walls of the school. Olivia stopped by their porch one evening after work, carrying a basket of books for Sophie and a thermos of tea for Michael. They sat on the front steps after Sophie had gone to bed, sipping in the cool night air, speaking not about grand ideas, but about the ordinary details that make up real life. Michael noticed how her laughter softened the edges of the day, how her listening steadied his thoughts. Olivia, for her part, seemed to find comfort in the way he'd never asked her to be anything other than herself. Inside the house, Sophie's drawings began to include Olivia. 3 stick figures, holding hands, labeled in uneven letters. Dad, Sophie, Olivia. Michael pinned one of them to the refrigerator, staring at it longer than he meant to. It was a child's sketch, but it captured something real. The quiet truth that Olivia was no longer on the outside of their lives. She was already inside, whether he admitted it or not. The house felt different with her around. Brighter somehow, not because she brought flowers or gifts, but because she brought laughter, presence, and ease. The kind of light that isn't forced, but simply happens when someone belongs. Though Michael still carried caution in his heart, he could not ignore what was clear. Olivia Bennett had begun to change the rhythm of their small, safe world, not by rearranging it, but by adding something it hadn't had in years: hope. One chilly evening, after Sophie had gone to bed and the house had settled into its familiar quiet, Michael and Olivia found themselves sitting on the front porch steps. The air smelled faintly of rain, the kind of dampness that makes the night feel heavier, closer. Olivia pulled her knees up to her chest, resting her chin there, her eyes fixed on the darkened street ahead. For a while, neither of them spoke. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was steady, like a space both of them had grown used to inhabiting. Finally, Olivia's voice broke the stillness, low and hesitant. "You know," she said, her words careful, "at the wedding that night, I didn't just grab your hand to get away from him." She paused, her fingers tightening around the fabric of her sweater. "I grabbed it because you look like you understood what it feels like to be alone in a room full of people." Michael turned to her, the weight of her confession settling into him. He thought of how he had stood by the bar that night, sipping club soda, pretending not to notice the way life had gone on without him. He thought of how often he had done that since his wife passed, stood on the sidelines, existing but never quite belonging. In Olivia's words, he felt seen in a way that startled him. "I do," he admitted softly. "I know exactly what that feels like." Olivia's eyes shifted to him then, really looking at him, past the polite smiles and easy banter they'd exchanged in the weeks since. "That's why I trusted you," she whispered. "Because you didn't look like someone trying to impress the room. You look like someone just trying to get through it." Michael exhaled, a sound that was part relief, part ache. "I was," he said with a faint smile. "Most days that's what it feels like. Just getting through it." There was a pause long enough for the truth of their words to settle between them. Olivia leaned her head against the railing, her voice barely more than a murmur. "I'm tired of pretending I'm fine. Tired of smiling like none of it touched me." Michael nodded slowly. "You don't have to pretend with me." Her hand reached across the small space between them then, tentative at first, before her fingers curled around his. This time there was no urgency, no performance meant for anyone else to see, just warmth, just presence. For the first time in years, Michael didn't feel the need to fill the silence with reassurances or explanations. It was enough to sit there hand in hand, sharing the kind of loneliness that had no name but carried weight all the same. In that quiet, they found a different kind of strength, not in pretending to be unbreakable, but in admitting that they weren't. The porch light hummed softly above them, casting a gentle glow on the steps. Inside, Sophie's soft breathing filled the house with its own rhythm, steady and safe. Out here, Michael and Olivia sat side by side, no longer strangers bound by a single night, but two people willing at last to stop pretending they were fine. Sometimes it isn't grand declarations that change the course of a story. Sometimes it's the quiet act of saying without words, "I see you, I'm here too." Life took on a new rhythm, one that Michael hadn't realized he'd been missing until Olivia slipped into it. The change didn't arrive with grand gestures or dramatic confessions. It came quietly, through the ordinary moments that stitched their days together. On Saturday mornings, Olivia showed up in worn jeans and a soft sweater, laughing as she flipped pancakes with Sophie at the stove. The kitchen filled with the smell of butter and syrup, the sound of Sophie's giggles as she tried to sneak chocolate chips into the batter when Olivia wasn't looking. Michael would stand back sometimes, leaning against the counter, just watching. There was something healing in the sight of his daughter's joy mingling with Olivia's easy laughter. Evenings became softer too. They built blanket forts in the living room. The three of them squeezed together under a string of twinkle lights while Sophie read aloud from her favorite dinosaur books. On other nights, they cooked pasta, Olivia singing off-key to the radio, while Michael pretended not to notice that half the sauce ended up on the counter. Sophie would roll her eyes and declare herself the only serious cook in the family, and the sound of their laughter would carry through the house long after the meal was done. Michael found himself smiling more, without forcing it, without realizing it. The heaviness that had once lingered in his chest began to lift, replaced by something lighter, steadier. Sophie noticed it too. One evening, as Michael tucked her into bed, she pressed a folded piece of paper into his hand. "Don't read it until later," she whispered, with a conspiratorial grin. After she drifted off to sleep, he unfolded the note. Written in her big, uneven handwriting, decorated with hearts and little dinosaur doodles, were the words, "Dear Dad, I like how you laugh more now. I like that Olivia makes pancakes with chocolate chips even when it's not Saturday. I like that she calls me her favorite dinosaur expert. I think Mom would be happy you're not sad anymore. Love, Sophie." Michael read it once, then again, and by the third time his vision blurred. The letter was simple, childlike, but it carried a truth he couldn't deny. Olivia had brought light back into their home, not by replacing what was lost, but by adding something new, a warmth that made room for both memory and hope. Later that night, he showed the letter to Olivia as they sat on the porch, sipping tea in the quiet. She read it silently, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears when she looked up at him. She didn't say anything at first. She simply reached for his hand, her grip steady. "She's incredible," she whispered finally. "She is," Michael replied, his voice thick with emotion. "And so are you." For the first time in a long time, Michael no longer felt like he was just holding his life together. He felt like he was building something again. Something real. Something that looked, in every ordinary way, like a family. The spring sun dipped low, spilling golden light across the vineyard lawn. Another wedding, another evening filled with music and laughter. This time, though, Michael wasn't standing alone near the bar with a club soda in hand. He was with Olivia, her fingers threaded easily through his, and with Sophie, who twirled in her pale yellow dress as if the dance floor belonged entirely to her. The scene felt familiar, yet transformed. The same backdrop where their story had begun, but now rewritten with warmth instead of solitude. As the reception carried on, Michael caught Olivia's eye and saw the mischievous curve of her smile. He knew she was up to something before it happened. The bouquet toss began, the bride turning with a laugh, and Olivia stepped forward into the crowd of women waiting. She didn't hang back shyly, as Michael might have expected. She lifted her hands high, positioning herself with intent. The bouquet flew, a swirl of white roses and ribbon, and landed squarely in her grasp. Sophie's laughter rang out, bright and unrestrained, echoing across the vineyard. "She got it, Dad! She got it!" she squealed, clapping her hands so hard she nearly dropped her juice. Michael could only shake his head, grinning despite himself, as Olivia held the flowers triumphantly above her head, her eyes dancing with delight. When she returned to his bouquet in hand, Michael raised a brow. "On purpose?" "Absolutely," Olivia said, slipping her free hand back into his. "Some things are worth catching." It was such a simple line, spoken with ease, but it sank deep. Michael glanced at Sophie, still giggling, and then back at Olivia. In that instant, it was impossible not to remember the first time she had taken his hand on a dance floor under these same lights. Then it had been out of fear, out of desperation to escape the shadow of her past. That first touch hadn't been about love. It had been about survival, about kindness, about two strangers finding refuge in each other when they needed it most. Now, standing together beneath the lanterns, he realized how far they had come. No longer strangers, no longer pretending. The courage it took to hold on that night had led them here, not through grand declarations, but through small, steady acts of trust, through pancake breakfasts and bedtime stories, through laughter shared on porches and quiet tears wiped away, through Sophie's innocent drawings that had quietly written Olivia into the family long before either of them had dared to say it aloud. As music filled the evening air, Olivia leaned closer, whispering with a softness that only he could hear. "All of this, it started with one dance." Michael smiled, the kind of smile that came not from chance, but from recognition. "It did," he murmured, "but it wasn't the dance that mattered. It was the hand I held." Later, as Sophie dozed in the back seat on the drive home, the bouquet resting in her lap like a promise, Michael and Olivia sat together on the porch once more. The same steps where they had first admitted their loneliness now held something new. Peace. Olivia leaned against his shoulder, her voice tender. "You saved me that night." He turned, pressing a kiss to her hair. "You saved me too. I just needed longer to see it." As the quiet wrapped around them, Michael knew the truth of it. Love hadn't begun with fireworks or fate. It had begun with kindness, with the courage to take a stranger's hand on a crowded floor and the grace to never let go. In the glow of a vineyard wedding, Michael Carter, a widowed single father, stood on the sidelines, his heart tethered to routine and the memory of loss. When Olivia Bennett, carrying the weight of a betrayal, asked him to dance to escape her ex's shadow, a single moment shifted their lives forever. Their story unveils a profound lesson. Love and healing often begin with the smallest acts of kindness. Michael, a man who had built a safe, quiet world for his daughter Sophie, offered Olivia refuge, not just from her past, but from the loneliness they both knew too well. Their dance, born of necessity, grew into shared laughter, pancake mornings, and Sophie's drawings that quietly named Olivia family. This tale teaches us that second chances don't always arrive with grand gestures. They slip in through fleeting glances, gentle hands, and the courage to see someone's pain and stay. Michael and Olivia, two souls bruised by life, found strength not in erasing their scars, but in sharing them. Their journey stirs the heart, evoking tears for the solitude they carried and joy for the family they built. One moment, one choice at a time. It reminds us to look for the quiet heroes in crowded rooms, to offer kindness when it's least expected. Because sometimes a single dance can rewrite a life story. Which moment in Michael and Olivia's story touched you most? Was it their first dance, born of vulnerability, or Sophie's letter that sealed their bond? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'm eager to hear how this resonated with you. If stories of quiet courage and unexpected love light up your heart, hit subscribe and join our community for more tales that remind us kindness can change everything. Your story matters. Let's share it.